Hello friends, let us have introduction to Right to Information Act. As you know, Right to Information Act came into existence in India in 2005. Let us have a look on background and philosophy of Right to Information Act. Surprisingly, the history of Right to Information Act goes beyond 200 years. In Sweden, in 1766, the concept of right to information came into existence for the first time in the world history. It was the year 1766. It was monarchy in Sweden which enacted such legislation, but actually it was not a legislation. It was a code of conduct set for the rulers. It was the first instance in the world history that the rulers gave access to the citizens to the decision making process or policy making process. But after 1766, there was a long gap in world history, because only in 1948 UN Assembly resolution came. The UN Assembly resolution in 1948 says very clearly that freedom of information is fundamental human right. There was a lobby saying that freedom of information is not a fundamental human right, but it is just a human right. What fundamentality the freedom of information has over other fundamental human rights? Other fundamental human rights, as you know, is right to food, right to life, and the freedom of information is important because these other fundamental human rights are dependent on the right of information or freedom of information for their effective implementation. And hence, it can be said that freedom of information has more fundamentality than other fundamental human rights. And hence, in 1948, the UN General Assembly proclaimed that freedom of information is fundamental human right. After that, in United States of America, in 1966, first ever Right to Information Act or Transparency Act came into existence. But unfortunately or fortunately, in 1971 there was Watergate scandal. You know Watergate scandal, which was famous for corruption. After that scandal, the American population realized that there should be some amendments in Transparency Act, and so in 1974 amended Transparency Act came into existence, and it is a modern act on which basis so many countries adopted right to information as legislation. After that, 56 countries adopted right to information as their legislation. You know, India is 57th country enacting such legislation. If we see the list of other 56 countries who have enacted such legislation before India, the list is very interesting. The list includes countries from Northern America, most of European countries, Australia, Colombia, Peru, Japan, etc. India is 57th country. It is very interesting that most of the countries which adopted such piece of legislation in their respective area, those countries are considered as developed countries. Most of the developed countries adopted such legislation firstly. Still, most of the developing countries are in the process of adopting such legislation. India is a country among first some countries which adopted this legislation and which comes under the category of developing country. It was said that whether such legislation will be successful in India, whether the population of India can sustain such legislation, can such legislation will be a boomerang on the Indian bureaucracy, that steel frame which is in existence since British period. The answer lies in the implementation of this act. The Indian Rti Act is very interesting, very matured, and it has so many components. Though India is one of the developing countries firstly adopting such legislation, India is still experimenting with such legislation. Yes, there are some loopholes, there are always some loopholes. Even constitution is amended in India. So, there are some loopholes, but let us try to understand the philosophy behind Rti Act, and then only we can understand the loopholes of which I am talking right now. In the history of right to information, Supreme Court ruling of 1982 is of very much importance, because in 1982 Supreme Court said in its interim judgment that disclosure of information as regards the functioning of government must be the rule and secrecy an exception. The observation is very important because it came on the background of history of Official Secrets Act, which was enacted in 1923. Official Secrets Act was a typical British legislation prohibiting Indian citizens to get information of the rulers or the decision making of the rulers. But in 1982, when Supreme Court said that disclosure of information must be the rule and secrecy an exception, it was a pioneering statement for Right to Information Act. After that, in 1985, one case was there. Sheila Barse was a social worker from Amravati. She fought a case against Government of India and got information about juvenile delinquents in custody. Actually, in Amravati prison, there were some small children with lady convicts, women convicts in prison, and hence Sheila Barse fought in the court for the information regarding their food and education, because she was saying that the children who are in custody should actually get the quality education and quality food. And hence it was the first instance in the history of India that particular information regarding particular incident or particular topic was delivered to a citizen as per Supreme Court's judgment. After that, in 1986, a case between Mr. Kulwal versus Jaipur Municipal Corporation was there. The issue was whether right to information forms constitutional or not, whether right to information is constitutional right or not. It is true that there is no direct mention of right to information in our constitution, but the judgment of 1986 case was that right to information is implicit in Article 19(1), which guarantees freedom of speech and expression. The logic was that without right to information, no effective implementation of freedom of speech and expression can be there. And if constitution gives freedom of speech and expression to the citizens, then the right to information should be given to the citizens, because without right to information there is no meaning of freedom of speech and expression. The judgment was a landmark judgment. After that, there were so many state level statutes which came into existence. The states which enacted such statute were Tamil Nadu, Goa, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Delhi, etc. But these state level statutes were not so successful. The reason was twofold. Basic reason was that there was no awareness campaign accompanying with such legislation. So people were not aware about their right to information. So there was a miserable response to the Right to Information Act, which was enacted at state level. Only in Maharashtra some success was there because of social workers' initiatives like initiatives of Mr. Anna Hazare. After that, in Delhi some success was there, but in Tamil Nadu the Right to Information Act, which was at state level, it failed. Another reason was that Official Secrets Act is a central legislation. Official Secrets Act is a central legislation, and a state level legislation cannot overpower central level legislation, and hence there was a dichotomy in existence. On one side, state level statute was saying that yes, citizens are having right to information, and on the other hand, central level statute like Official Secrets Act, it was denying access to the information. So it was dichotomy, and as state level statute cannot overpower central level statute, the state level statute miserably failed. In the case of Right to Information Act, which was enacted in 2005, the case is different, because it is clearly said in the provisions of the Act that the provisions of Official Secrets Act are not applicable to the applications made under Right to Information Act 2005. Furthermore, Right to Information Act 2005 is also central legislation. So, it has equality with Official Secrets Act of 1923. Please remember that Official Secrets Act is not at all repealed, it is in existence, but still, as Right to Information Act is a latest act and it is a central level legislation, and it is clearly said that provisions of Official Secrets Act are not applicable to the applications made under Right to Information Act. It is very clear that Official Secrets Act is overpowered by Right to Information Act 2005. Then we will have to see what philosophy this Right to Information Act has. There was a statement from Mahatma Gandhi saying that the real Swaraj will come not by the acquisition of authority by a few, but by the acquisition of capacity by all to resist authority when abused. It is a very good statement. Mahatma says that when the real Swaraj will come, it will not come only by the acquisition of authority by a few, because it will be a rule of few, but there should be capacity acquisition, there should be capacity building of whom? Capacity building of all. Everybody living in this country should be made aware of the fact. His capacity should be built up, and his capacity is to be built up for what? The capacity should be built up to resist authority when abused. This last part of sentence is very interesting. To resist authority when abused. You see, always there is some abuse of authority which we always see around. The authority can be a political, an authority can be administrative, authority can be cultural, authority can be religious. So, whenever there is some abuse, that abuse should be resisted. That resistance should come from all, from everybody, from all stakeholders, and to resist such abuse, capacity building is necessary. And that is what Gandhiji said. It is actually a bottom line of Right to Information Act. Gandhiji called it as real Swaraj, and it is very true. The real Swaraj will come when capacity building of all will be there. Right to Information Act tries to build the capacity of each and every citizen, because it gives to acquire information whichever is needed by the citizen. It confers right to get the information. It confers right to access the information with which the citizen should get the information is the motto behind the Right to Information Act. Actually, in preamble, the Act narrates the objectives of the Act. It says the Act is to promote transparency and accountability in working of the public authorities. So, there should be transparency and accountability in working of whom? In working of public authority. Actually, in our history and in our culture, we have respected transparency a lot. We always call Ram as Maryada Purushottam. Why he was called Maryada Purushottam? Because his life was transparent. We always respect Dharmaraj in Mahabharata because he always said whatever was truth only. So, truth was important. Even Gandhiji said truth is God. So, in our culture and history, we have respected transparency, but at individual level. But at institutional level, this transparency never came into existence. Now, this Act says that whatever value you are respecting in individual life should be respected in institutional life also. and hence each and every institution should have transparency and accountability in its working. The preamble says that transparency and accountability should be there in the working of public authority. Actually, this concept of public authority is a gift of this Rti Act to our beloved nation. It is actually a gift because in definition it has defined the concept of public authority. Public authority does not mean only governmental department or governmental office. It includes non-governmental entities also, and hence it is very important to understand what is public authority. In short, we can say that public authority means government department, government offices, government corporations and NGOs having government funds, actually instrumentalities of the government can be considered as public authority. So, the motto of this act is to promote transparency and accountability in the working of public authorities. Another objective of this act is to contain corruption. Please mind well, it says contain corruption because to eradicate corruption is the objective of another piece of legislation called Anti-Corruption Act. So, this legislation says, this preamble says that the objective of this act is to contain corruption. So, containing corruption can be offshoot of implementation of this act. Another important objective which is mentioned in the preamble of Right to Information Act is to create informed citizenry for functioning of democracy. India is a democratic country and there should be a smooth functioning of democracy, and for that informed citizenry is a must. Only informed citizenry can run democracy smoothly and successfully, and hence this act says that the objective of this act is to create informed citizenry for functioning of democracy. There are some other points mentioned in preamble which are very interesting. The preamble mentions two sides. One side is supply side and another side is demand side. It is not mentioned in these nomenclatures in preamble. The preamble says information givers and information seekers. Information seekers is a demand side and information givers is a supply side. The preamble further says there are some conflicting interests between these two groups, that is information giver and information seeker. There may be some conflicting interest for disclosing the information, and the act has come into existence to resolve the conflicting interests of both the groups. The word used in preamble is to harmonize the conflicting interests of these two groups. It is not necessary that always disclosure of information should create such conflict. There may not be such conflict, and if there is no conflict, there is no need of using provisions of this act. This act is only, mind well, this act is only for harmonizing conflicting interest of demand and supply side if such conflict exists. It means that in case of no conflict situation, there is no need to use provisions of this act, because the ultimate aim of this act is to set out practical regime of right to information in India. So, each and every citizen has been conferred with right to get the information, to inspect the information, to access the information which is available with public authority. The ultimate aim is to preserve paramountcy of democratic ideal which is mentioned in our constitution. Actually, this act is a paradigm shift. The paradigm shift is a term which can be referred as a sea change. What sea change this revolutionary act wants to, what sea change this revolutionary act wants to imbibe in the life of Indians? The first thing is that it is the only one act which is implemented by the government machinery as well as by public institutions, and that implementation is expected to be supervised by the citizens. This is the only such kind of act, because in case of all other statutes, the implementation lies with the citizens, the implementation lies with the public, and the supervision lies with the government machinery, or the supervision lies with the public institutions. This is the only act which says that implementation should be done by public authorities, that is government machinery and public institutions, and the supervision on that implementation should be done by the public. Some years have been passed since this Right to Information Act has come into existence. It seems that the people are not in the position to supervise the implementation of this act, and unfortunately some of the public authorities are not in the position to implement this act properly. The reason is very simple, because the people are not aware about their supervising power, and the public institutions and government machinery is not in habit of implementing, they are in the habit of supervision only. So, it will take some time to adjust. It is a transition period, but I hope that in some more years, in coming years, the transition phase will be over and the implementation will be done properly by the public institutions and government machinery, and supervision will be done properly by the public or citizens of India. The Rti Act gives access to the information available with the public authority. Okay.